Okay, Year 11, welcome to your video tutorial on data types. Today we're going to have a look at different data types that I use within programming and how and why I use them. So, last lesson we were looking at abstraction and refinement. So how I can break down a system into a different lot of hierarchy. You'll remember at the bottom of that hierarchy was a subroutine, and we said that a subroutine takes together one logical task, performs one logical task. Now, some of the tasks that are involved within a subroutine are looking at taking information and moving information around a program. That's really what we're going to look at in terms of data types. So our dot points today is data types used in solutions. So the first thing you need to understand before you can understand what data types are is what is a variable. So you may or may not already be aware of this, but programming languages, except for AI, aren't very smart. Unlike human beings, programs can't actually infer. So, you can't just say, oh, take that input from the user and just store it. It doesn't exactly work like that. When I want to use, do, put a value to anything in my program, I have to use a variable. A variable is like a piece of memory, and I usually assign it a name. So depending on the programming language I'm using depends on how I assign that. But what I tell my system, for example, if I see first name is a variable, don't worry, and you should be expecting this type of data in it. So when I create a variable, I usually have to define it and then provide it with a value. That can either be a hard-coded value, that can be a value that's written and then overwritten multiple times, or that can be also a value that's input by my user into the program. So, like I said before, variables, different programming languages, cater for different types of data to be stored in those variables, and that's what we're going to look at today. So you can store whole lots of different things, numbers, words, dates, values, characters, and they all have new subject-specific terminology that I need you to learn. So we're not going to use the words numbers, words, dates, decimals anymore. They actually have subject-specific terms. The first one is a string. Now, a string is a data type that's used to store alphanumeric characters. Now, that's particularly important word there, alphanumeric. This isn't just necessarily numbers, isn't just necessarily letters. It can be numbers as well. The string data type is used when I have a combination of letters and numbers and I don't actually wish to perform a calculation with that value. So first name would be a great example for a string. Hello is another great example for a string, but so is one cat. Okay, that's a combination of letters and numbers, and I can actually store that all in a string. That is compared with an integer. The integer data types allow you to store whole values, either positive or negative. In terms of these comments about primary storage and bytes, I'll come back to those later. So you don't have to worry too much about those just for the moment. The integer data type allows me to store whole numbers. Now, where I might want to store a number as an integer, that I might not necessarily want to store it as a string, is when I perform a calculation. So if I have a calculator program and I'm taking input from my user for numbers and adding them together, I'd want to store it as an integer. However, if I'm taking a street address, say the number 17 as my street number, I would likely store that, because it's still alphanumeric, as a string. When I want to perform calculations or some kind of arithmetic, I would store it as an integer. The third data point is floating point or real. Unfortunately for us, a lot of the time in IT, there is 7 different names for the same thing. Real numbers or non-whole numbers, or numbers that have a decimal point, are called floating point or real data. That's a decimal style number. So things like, currency will often be stored as floating point or real. And finally, the last data type is a boolean. The boolean data type is the most simple and can only really have 2 values, true or false. For those of you guys who have programmed before, true or false values are used a lot of the time in error checking. So the best anecdotal example I can give you guys, which most of you will be familiar with, is the amount of times it takes for you or the amount of chances, you have to unlock your phone. You'll notice, depending on your operating system, you may have 5 chances. Okay? What will happen at the start of the logic controlling that is there will be a boolean, and it will either be true or false. It might have a variable called attempts taken or attempts, and that attempts variable will continue incrementing. And when it takes, and the logic that will control it is it might be while attempts is less than 6, or while attempts is less than or equal to 5, or while attempts is less than 3. Okay, that value for greater than or less than is either true or false, and that data type would be a boolean. And that's it, guys. That's data types.